In this video we will review the Orbit HUD widget. So this drives basically what's going on within our world, and it's actually housing quite a lot of the code. If we look at our hierarchy, you can see that I've just within my canvas panel got my preset buttons at the bottom here on the right. I've got left and right for my product switcher and swapping the mesh out and related information. I have then got just a vertical line, which is an image, then title block and product number in the switcher and a price text block. Now each of those is bound to a variable that just pulls in the price and title from an array in the Orbit actor. If you recall where I said I've just kind of hard coded it for now. In reality it should really all be in a data table, but for the prototype I'm just using the array to update that information. And just the logo. I've got a UI canvas panel, which is a separate canvas panel which handles when my mouse is over the rig of the Orbit actor. Based on a condition, it then lets me draw the mouse UI, which is my click and line that helps me change the rotation rate of the Orbit actor itself. The counter graphic itself, just that PNG in the background, which is just the arrows. And then there's also an autofocus icon, which when I get over the scale threshold that's established, it turns on the line trace, which then allows us to move our mouse over the static mesh, particularly the product static mesh component in the Orbit setup. And it just gives us some feedback saying that we're now in autofocus mode. So coming to the graph, you can see my begin play here and on my on tick. So there's quite a lot going on tick. Doesn't necessarily need to be on tick. Some of this could be on the timer to be a bit more performant, but for now I've just put it on a tick. So looking at our setup, I've got the same old trick of writing a reference to self for the Orbit HUD to the game instance, and I'm just setting the visibility of that autofocus icon to hidden because I know the scale is always under the threshold when it starts. On event construct, I'm actually starting an autofocus on timer event, so it's not firing on tick. And that autofocus is I'm using the focus trace channel, which is one that we've set up in project settings. Another thing which is important is that in my Orbit actor, you'll see that in my rig, the collision for rig is ignoring the focus channel, but my product is only blocking the focus channel. So that means that I can qualify whether or not my get hit result under cursor by channel is hitting the actor. So is hit result actor the correct actor, but the trace can ignore the rig and only sets the results of the condition because our focus is hitting the static mesh. So what I'm doing, I'm getting that hit result distance, i.e. the distance from the camera to the product static mesh, and making that the manual focal distance of my cine camera actor pawn, cine camera component. So that's updating. And then I'm just shifting the f-stop. So it's a very small f-stop and therefore reduces the depth of field so that it looks like we're focusing on a particular section. I'm turning on that autofocus icon and playing the animation, which just fades up and down on number of loops to play at 0, so infinitely. So that is happening there. When the condition is not met, i.e. is under a scale of 1.8, then I'm just resetting focus settings and the lens settings, the sort of defaults that I've established, hiding the auto icon and stopping the animation. So I've got ahead of myself slightly there, but that's just to explain that that is being triggered. And because of the condition, it's not getting beyond the branch until the scale of the product static mesh is over 1.8 in world scale. So this next block of blueprints deals with the navigation UI, which is a drawn line on screen. So if I just show you that again, so when I'm clicking and moving the mouse, I'm drawing a line and affecting the rotation of the mesh. Now the distance obviously affects the rate of rotation, so you can go a bit crazy, or you can just sort of be a bit more fluid, and then when you let go it retains that rotation rate. So this custom event, these two custom events, apologies, are being called by the orbit actor. If you recall, when we clicked on the rig, so only when we click on the rig, we were setting a few conditions, and then here are those two custom events. So this is on click if product navigable is true, and if it's set to false, then I am removing the UI from the parent. So let's look at these two events. So first things first, I'm just running a sequence and just doing it once, capturing the mouse position on the viewport and saving that as a local variable, because that's our start click screen position. I'm then setting the condition of this boolean to true is UI tracking, and if it is tracking, that will allow us to do a few other things. Let me just do a find reference on get is UI tracking. So here on tick, because that condition is true, we're getting the mouse position on viewport and updating the screen position of my UI track widget to the mouse position on tick, so it updates constantly. So this is UI track widget, which is UI orbit. In my UI orbit widget, there's nothing in there at all, but it needs that to be able to add it as a child, so it's just an empty widget. I've then just written a function which is basically working out Pythagoras theorem in terms of working out the distance from the start click, the offset position x and y, and then I'm just running sort of Pythagoras' theorem to work out the distance of the line. So I'm always returning the distance of the line, no matter which direction it's pointing in, and that's just the blueprints to get Pythag. I don't know if there's a function within. I've never looked actually. That's my function. Hypotenuse. There you go. They have it there. Oh well, I was being clever. So quite straightforward. High school maths. And then mouse distance from dynamic origin is effectively that distance, the Pythag. And then mouse position in relation to origin. I'm establishing whether or not the mouse is above or below, left or right, by taking the mouse position and understanding where the cursor is in relation to the original click, and then setting a variable for X rotation direction to either 1 or -1, and similarly 1 or -1 to say whether it's positive or negative from the original click position. Now with all that information, I'm then drawing an onPaint function, but I'm giving that condition as well. So I'm only saying draw if the condition of mouse down is true. And if that is true, then get the original click position, draw a line from that to the current mouse position. This will run on tick automatically. And that then is what's being handled on tick. So this row deals with adding a widget to the mouse UI canvas panel when I click. So I'm setting that as UI click widget, so appear on the click position. And then I am creating another one which tracks the mouse and is the track widget. And the reason that it's tracking me is because we're saying here on tick, is tracking, and then we're setting that tracking widget always to the mouse position on viewport on tick, so that's updating constantly. We then have our swap incrementer buttons. Now there's another labels HUD widget which gets spawned, if you recall, after we have spawned all the markers in the world. Now when I'm clicking the buttons, I'm just removing that so that it gets recreated when the static mesh updates, because if you recall, we're then wanting to recreate it because it's now referring to a new set of sockets on a new static mesh. So that clears it immediately. So here with are the incrementer buttons enabled or disabled. This is kind of optional. I've got it set to true, so basically when I'm clicking on a button, if I click it a second time, it's not going to work because I've disabled the button. I'm re-enabling it when the new static mesh has moved into the central position on screen. So that's kind of just a bit of me playing around with the interaction, seeing what is intuitive and what works and what doesn't. So it's kind of controlling when the buttons are active or not. I'm then using a math inverter, which is just a float. It could be an integer actually, which is just 1 or -1. That will make sense shortly. Because I'm clicking right or left, rather than writing all the code twice for moving the orbit actor, I've written it once, but then I'm just multiplying it, whether it's positive or negative, and just using this maths inverter variable, which I'm swapping out based on the direction of the button I am selecting, positive or negative, in world space as well. Should product move, so just a condition. And then here is the kind of incrementer. So if I'm clicking right, I am getting the length of the static mesh array in our orbit actor, and then setting that as our modulo max. And our incrementer is of 1. So we're looking at our current mesh number, adding 1, comparing that to the modulo, which is the number of mesh in the static mesh array. And the modulo is a way of creating a loop where it just compares and resets to 0. And then that means that if I constantly click on the right button, it will go 0, 1, 2. Rather than going to 3, it will go back to 0. Now, I didn't get that working inversely. I need to work out how to do that. So I've done it old school here, where I'm taking the length again. So this is dynamic. If I update that static mesh array with 30 products, representing by static mesh, then this will still work. I'm getting the length of that array, deleting 1, updating the mesh number, setting the swap mesh integer, and if the condition that the mesh net integer is less than 1, then we know it is 0, and therefore if that is false, it's more than 0, and therefore we can continue to delete. And true resets it to the max length integer, looping it round. And then in our labels HUD, which I'll go through in another video, but this is in effect clearing the labels on the screen, emptying any of the arrays that register them as canvas slots, clear the children on the canvas panel, and then recreate a new set based on that new static mesh. And this is the tick, which deals with updating their position on screen as we are rotating the product static mesh. So our autofocus I've gone over. Our presets I went over in a previous video. So this is just updating and passing through the presets. As mentioned, this should probably be in with the product or even a data table with some preset rotation. Now looking at tick, there's a few other things going on. So initially we're just writing the delta time into its own variable. We can of course just use get world delta seconds. I'm not in the habit of using that yet. So this condition, if the mouse is down, now what I am affecting here is the rotation rate of the rotating movement component in our orbit actor, but I am basing that rotation rate on a couple of things. So I am taking the scale of the mesh. I wanted it to be so that if the mesh was very large, when I am interacting and setting the rotation speed with the length of the line of my UI at a large scale, I didn't want that to be overwhelming, so I'm using the scale as a way of dampening down the speed. As the mesh gets larger, the sensitivity of the interaction reduces, so it's just a bit easier to control. So I am getting the mouse distance from the dynamic origin, which is what we set between our click and tracking UI. I've got another sort of dampener here just to sort of be able to fine tune things. Putting that through and multiplying it based on the direction amount. So if you recall, that was a positive or a negative in our function. Let's have a look. Yeah, mouse relation. So if you recall, in this function we were setting whether or not it was a positive or a negative just by using 1 or minus 1 and setting that in our direction amount. So we're making it positive or negative, dampening it down based on our scale, and I'm inverting it again because it was working in the opposite way that I wanted it to work. So this just swaps their direction again and gives me the interaction that I was expecting. I'm then running another custom event, which we'll go into in a moment, which only fires if the condition should product move is true, which we set here, should product move, when we're clicking the buttons. We've done our Pythagoras' theorem, that's just what's going on here. So our actor move custom event is handling the sleight of hand using the orbit actor that's set at our origin, if you remember, 0, 0, 0. It is moving the actor right or left and v-interping that move. Once it's off screen, it's moving it to the opposite side and then v-interping again from that position back to the origin. So that's just what's happening. It's one actor that appears to carousel to the left or right and swaps the static mesh when off screen. So let's see what happens on actor move at this sequence. Just once we are setting the target location. So this is hard coded. I've just got a float which I've determined how far off screen I want the mesh to move, 250. And if you recall, the maths inverter then just makes that positive or negative. That gets updated based on whether I've clicked on the left or right buttons on the HUD, and therefore then sets the position positive or negative to the origin on Y. I'm then taking the actor location and v-interping to that target location, be it left or right, and then comparing the actor location to the target location and saying if that condition is true with quite a generous sort of tolerance, then trigger these booleans. So now the product should not move because we've reached our destination. The incrementer buttons are re-enabled. If you recall, we switched them off so that you couldn't keep clicking them whilst the orbit actor was v-interping. And then I'm resetting all of my do-onces. Those get reset apart from the reset store location, which I'm only wanting to reset every other time this code runs because of the sleight of hand. So I've just used a flip-flop to determine that. And then this deals with repositioning the static mesh. So get rid of some of that because that's now superfluous. This condition is getting my actor location on the Y, forcing it to be positive whether it's positive or negative, using the absolute node, and then just seeing if that is greater than the target off location with the boundary tolerance I've just set to 5. So that 250 minus 5 is 245. Actor location is bigger, and I've just made it absolute, so it doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative. So if that's true, I'm then seeing whether or not my maths inverter was positive or negative, because I'm saying if it's larger or greater than 0, we know it's 1 or minus 1, then do two things. So swap the mesh store location and retrip, which is a function that I've written. So inside that function, we're getting our actor, we're setting the location to the opposite side. So the new Y location takes our current location, offset, moves it to the new Y location in the function, or inverts it, again depending on which direction we're going in. Then our mesh number gets passed through to our custom event in the orbit actor. If you remember, that goes to selection, so that gets passed and triggers the swap mesh custom event, thereby using that selection number to choose which static mesh to add to the product static mesh component from the array. And then we are retripping the location. So where we had the target location to be our off-screen offset, the 250, I'm now setting it to be 0, 0, the origin, and therefore when we are rerunning our set actor location, the target is now the center of the screen and our actor location is off the screen. So that just handles everything in terms of moving it left or right. So there's a lot there, but I just wanted to sort of show the techniques that I'd used. So I have put that in here in the HUD. I'm thinking whether or not this would be better off in the setup, but I've just left it here for now for the prototype. But you can see the technique I've used in terms of one piece of code that handles the left and right and triggering everything else. So I hope that video is of use. If so, please do like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to receive any updates. And thank you for your support.